In the days before the great rains washed the old world clean, when the southern peaks still touched the belly of heaven, and the dragons spoke in tongues of fire, there lived a goddess who wept tears of jade. But the priests who gather those sacred stones from the mountain pools will not tell you why she weeps, for the truth would curse their temples and unmake the prayers of 10,000 generations. Listen now, and I will tell you what was forgotten. Before the age of bronze, before the first rice bent its head to the sickle, before even the mighty Hùng Kings raised their voices to command the earth, the land we call our home belonged to the immortals. They walked between the mists that clung to the mountains, and their footsteps left pools of starlight on the forest floor. The greatest of these divine beings was Thiên Hậu, the Celestial Empress, whose palace stood atop the highest peak of what mortals would later name Thiên Sơn, the mountain of heaven. Thiên Hậu beauty was such that when she unveiled her face, the moon would hide in shame. Her hair fell like black water down to her feet, each strand containing the memory of a star. She wore robes woven from cloud and silence, and her voice could call forth spring from the heart of winter. But it was not her beauty that made her powerful. No. Her true strength lay in the sacred sphere of heaven, a pearl of concentrated divine essence that hung suspended in the innermost chamber of her palace, pulsing with the rhythm of creation itself. This pearl was no mere treasure. It was the heart of the world, the axis upon which all things turned. From it flowed the rains that fed the rice fields, the winds that brought the seasons, the very breath that filled the lungs of newborn children. Thiên Hậu was its guardian, chosen before time began, bound to it by oaths older than language. She could no more abandon her duty than the sea could abandon salt. But the Celestial Empress was lonely. For 10,000 years she had stood watch, never descending from her mountain, never knowing the touch of another hand or the warmth of shared laughter. The other immortals came to her court to pay tribute, but they feared her power too greatly to offer friendship. They bowed low and spoke in careful whispers and departed as swiftly as courtesy allowed. Even the wind, when it passed through her halls, seemed to hurry on its way. In her solitude, Thiên Hậu took to watching the world below. She would sit at the edge of her palace, her feet dangling over clouds, and observe the lives of mortals as they scurried about their brief existence. She watched them plant and harvest, marry and mourn, struggle and celebrate. She envied them their simplicity, their freedom from the terrible weight of cosmic responsibility. One spring morning, as peach blossoms painted the lower slopes pink and white, Thiên Hậu gaze fell upon a young man working in the terraced fields far below. His name was Lac Long, and he was beautiful in the way that mortal things are beautiful, with the fierce brightness of a flame that knows it must soon extinguish. His shoulders were broad from labor, his hands skilled with both plow and sword, but it was not his strength that caught the goddess's attention. It was his laughter. Even from her distant height she could hear the sound of it, rich and unafraid, rolling across the valley like thunder. He laughed while he worked, laughed with his neighbors, laughed at the pranks of village children. His joy was a wild, untamed thing, and it called to something deep within Thiên Hậu ancient heart, something she had not known she possessed. She began to watch him more closely. She neglected her meditations, her rituals, her careful maintenance of the celestial order. Instead, she followed Lac Long through his days. She watched him tend his fields with patient devotion. She watched him carve toys for children from scraps of wood. She watched him sit alone at night, looking up at the stars, and she wondered what thoughts moved behind his eyes. The other immortals noticed her distraction. They whispered among themselves in the gardens of paradise, troubled by this change in one who had been constant since the world's foundation. The Dragon King sent emissaries. The Phoenix Queen dispatched her wisest counselors. All came with the same warning. A goddess cannot love a mortal. The gulf between heaven and earth exists for a reason. To bridge it is to invite catastrophe. Thiên Hậu heard their words and dismissed them. What did they know of loneliness? They had each other, had their courts and families and rivalries. She had only her duty, her endless vigil, her prison of clouds and responsibility. She made her decision on a night when the moon hung full and heavy over the rice fields. She would descend. She would walk among mortals, if only for a single night. She would speak to this Lac Long who laughed at the stars. The sacred sphere would be safe in her palace. The world would not end if she took a few hours for herself. But a goddess cannot simply walk down a mountain. Her power blazed too brightly, her divine essence too concentrated. She would burn the mortal world like a falling star. So Thiên Hậu did something that had never been done before. She divided herself. Using arts forbidden and ancient, she split her consciousness, pouring half her divine essence into a mortal form. The pain was extraordinary, like being torn in two by invisible hands, but when it was finished, two beings stood in her palace. One remained the Celestial Empress, diminished but still divine, still bound to her duty. The other was a mortal woman, beautiful but ordinary, with no memory of godhood, only a strange feeling of incompleteness and a yearning she could not name. The mortal Thiên Hậu descended the mountain paths in the darkness, her feet bleeding on stones she could no longer command. She stumbled into Lac Long's village at dawn, exhausted and confused, with no memory of who she truly was or where she had come from. Lac Long found her by the village well, half collapsed from her night's journey. He gave her water, asked no prying questions, offered her shelter in his modest house. His kindness was as natural as breathing. When he smiled at her, she felt something shift in her chest, a recognition beyond memory. She stayed. Days became weeks, weeks became months. She learned to plant rice, to cook over an open fire, to mend clothes and carry water. Her hands blistered and healed and grew strong. She learned the names of her neighbors, the taste of fermented fish, the smell of rain approaching over the mountains. She learned what it meant to be tired, to be hungry, to stub her toe and curse and laugh at her own clumsiness. And she fell in love. Lac Long courted her with a patience that spoke of deep waters. He brought her the first fruits from his garden. He taught her to fish in the river, their hands touching as he showed her how to hold the net. He sang old songs in the evening, his voice rough but true, and she found herself weeping without knowing why. On the night he asked her to marry him beneath a sky crowded with stars, she said yes without hesitation. She had never been happier. She had never felt so complete, despite the strange emptiness that sometimes woke her in the dark hours before dawn, a feeling that she had forgotten something terribly important. Meanwhile, atop Thiên Sơn, the divine half of Thiên Hậu tended her duties with mechanical precision. She was diminished, her power halved, but she maintained the rituals and kept the sacred sphere safe. She told herself she would reclaim her other half soon, that this separation was temporary. But seasons passed, and she could feel through the bond that connected her two selves the joy her mortal aspect experienced. She felt Lac Long's kiss. She felt the warmth of being held. She felt the terrible, wonderful vulnerability of loving something that could be lost. And she was jealous. Not of the mortal woman who wore her form. She was jealous of herself, of the half of her that had escaped the golden cage of divinity. In the village below, mortal Thiên Hậu gave birth to a son. They named him Min, and he was perfect in the way all parents believe their children to be perfect. He had his father's laugh and his mother's eyes, which sometimes seemed to hold depths that mortal eyes should not contain. The birth of the child changed something in the cosmic balance. A mortal woman carrying half a goddess's essence was one thing, but this child, born of that union, was something new, something unprecedented. He was a bridge between worlds, neither fully mortal nor touched by divinity, existing in a space that should have been empty. The immortals felt the disturbance ripple through the spheres of heaven. They convened councils, consulted ancient texts, cast divinations that came back confused and troubling. The Dragon King himself flew to Thiên Sơn to demand answers from the Celestial Empress. She received him in her reduced glory, her palace seeming somehow emptier than before. When he asked her what she had done, she told him the truth. She was too weary to dissemble, too divided to care about the consequences. The Dragon King's rage shook the mountain. Did she not understand what she had risked? The sacred sphere required a complete guardian, an undivided will. Already he could sense fluctuations in the world's harmony, storms forming where there should be none, droughts in places that should receive rain. The child was an abomination, a tear in the fabric between mortal and divine. It must be unmade. Thiên Hậu, even diminished, was still an empress. She drew herself to her full height and refused. The child was innocent. The mortal woman she had become was innocent. If there was fault, it was hers alone, and she would bear the consequences. But she would not destroy her son. The Dragon King departed, his warnings dire. The other immortals would not tolerate this transgression. They would act with or without her cooperation. She had days, perhaps weeks, before they assembled their forces. She must reunite her divided self and give up this foolish dream of mortal love, or everything she had built, everything she had guarded for 10,000 years, would come crashing down. That night, for the first time in the history of the world, the Celestial Empress wept. Her tears fell from the mountain as drops of liquid jade, scattering across the slopes, hardening into green stones that would be found by mortals in ages to come. They wept for the impossible choice before her, duty or love, cosmic order or personal happiness, the world or her child. In the village, mortal Thiên Hậu woke from a dream that felt like memory. She dreamed of clouds and starlight, of a palace at the top of the world, of power so vast it could reshape reality. She dreamed of splitting herself, of descending, of running towards something she desired more than breath. She woke with tears on her face and turned to find Lac Long watching her with worried eyes. She told him the dream. As she spoke, memories came flooding back, not like a door opening, but like a dam breaking. She remembered who she was, what she had done, what she had abandoned. The knowledge was agony. She was both mortal and divine, both complete and divided, pulled in two directions by forces that threatened to rip her apart. Lac Long listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Outside, their son Min slept peacefully, unaware that his existence had shattered the order of heaven. Finally, Lac Long spoke. He asked only one question. Did she regret it? Did she regret leaving her palace, meeting him, bearing their child? She could not answer, because the truth was complicated and terrible. She regretted nothing, and yet she regretted everything. She had tasted mortal joy and could not imagine returning to her lonely vigil, yet she could feel through her divine half the growing instability in the world. Floods were coming, earthquakes. The cosmic machinery she had maintained for 10 millennia was grinding out of alignment, and it was her fault, her abandonment, her selfish desire for happiness. People would die because she had wanted to laugh with a mortal man. The next morning, Thiên Hậu climbed the mountain. She left before dawn, kissing her sleeping son, touching Lac Long's face one last time. He did not try to stop her. He understood, in the way that good men understand impossible things, that some choices cannot be avoided. The path was brutal. Her mortal body, weakened by childbirth, struggled against slopes that her divine self could have traversed in a thought. She climbed for 3 days, her feet leaving bloody prints on ancient stone. The higher she went, the more she could feel her other self waiting, a presence like a great weight pressing down from above. She reached the palace gates at sunset on the 3rd day. Her divine self stood waiting, exactly where she had stood for countless ages, wearing robes of cloud and starlight that seemed almost transparent now, diminished by their separation. They looked at each other across the courtyard, mortal and goddess, two halves of a broken whole. The divine Thiên Hậu spoke first. She said the words they both knew must be spoken. The reunification must happen. The world's stability depended on it. But there was a price. To merge completely, the mortal half must surrender everything. The memories of her mortal life would be absorbed into the divine consciousness, but they would become distant, like stories told about someone else. The love she felt for Lac Long, the fierce protection she felt for Min, these would fade like dreams upon waking. She would return to being the Celestial Empress, complete and perfect and utterly alone. And Min, the child who should not exist, what of him? The immortals demanded his death, his unmaking, the erasure of the bridge he represented between mortal and divine. Mortal Thien Hao's heart shattered. She fell to her knees, her torn feet staining the jade floor with mortal blood. She begged her divine self to spare him. She offered anything, everything. Her memories, her love, her very existence. She would fade into nothing if the child could live. The divine Thien Hao looked down at her mortal self, and for the first time in ages, beyond counting, she felt uncertainty. The mortal's love for her child was so fierce, so absolute, that it burned like a sun. The divine half had felt it, shared it through their connection, but experiencing emotion through a bond and facing it directly were different things entirely. She made a choice that would echo through eternity. She agreed to spare Min, but she demanded a sacrifice that would balance the cosmic scales. The child could live, but he must be transformed. He could not remain a bridge between worlds, a tear in reality. He would become something else, something that belonged to neither heaven nor earth, but to the spaces between. She told her mortal self what must be done, and mortal Thien Hao wept tears of jade, just like her divine counterpart, because she understood the price and knew she had to pay it. That night, beneath a moonless sky, the two halves of Thien Hao performed a ritual that had never been performed before. They stood on opposite sides of the sacred sphere, that pearl of pure cosmic essence, and they called their son to them. Lak Long brought Min up the mountain path, carrying the boy on his shoulders. He did not ask what would happen. He trusted the woman he loved, even knowing that she was also a goddess who had deceived him, even knowing that this night would change everything. Min was 3 years old enough to walk, but young enough to ride his father's shoulders without shame. He giggled at the height, pointing at stars, asking questions in the way children do, infinite and innocent. They arrived at midnight, when the barrier between worlds grows thin. Lak Long set Min down in the courtyard, and the boy ran to his mother on sturdy legs, throwing his arms around her waist. She held him, this impossible child, born of her rebellion and her love, and she whispered apologies he could not understand. The divine Thien Hao raised her hands, and power flowed through the palace like wind through autumn leaves. She spoke in the language of creation, words that shaped reality itself. The sacred sphere pulsed with light, brighter and brighter, until the whole mountain blazed like a second sun. Min began to change. His mortal flesh could not hold the transformation, could not contain what he was becoming. He cried out, not in pain, but in confusion, reaching for his mother. She held him tighter, her tears falling on his changing form. He became translucent, then transparent, then something beyond physical sight. His essence spread outward, thinning, diffusing, becoming part of the spaces between things. He was not destroyed. He was transformed into something fundamental, something that would exist as long as the world existed. He became the mist, the morning fog that clings to rice fields, the clouds that gather on mountaintops, the steam rising from cooking pots, the breath visible on cold mornings, the vapor that hangs over rivers at dawn. Everywhere and nowhere, neither mortal nor divine, belonging to the in-between spaces where heaven and earth touch without meeting. Mortal Thien Hao collapsed as her son dissipated into vapor and possibility. Her grief was absolute, annihilating. She had saved him but lost him. He would exist forever but never hold her again. It was a mother's bargain, terrible and necessary, the sacrifice of presence for the gift of continuation. Lak Long knelt beside her, his own face wet with tears. He gathered her into his arms, and they held each other as the palace dissolved around them in morning light. The divine Thien Hao stood alone, watching them. She could feel her mortal half's grief as if it were her own, because it was her own. But she also felt the rightness of what had been done. The cosmic balance was settling, the disturbances easing. Min's transformation had provided what was needed, a sacrifice pure enough to pay for her transgression. Now came the final price. She called her mortal self to her, and the two halves approached each other across jade floors worn smooth by immortal feet. They embraced, and the reunification began. It was not like falling asleep. It was like being unmade and remade simultaneously, every atom of existence reorganized. Mortal Thien Hao felt herself dissolving, her memories becoming fluid, her love for Lac Long becoming distant as starlight. She fought to hold on to it, to keep the warmth of his embrace, the sound of Min's laughter, but it slipped through her fingers like water. The Celestial Empress absorbed her mortal half, became whole again, and the power that had been divided reunited with a thunderclap that shook the spheres of heaven. She stood complete, perfect, terrible in her restored divinity. But something had changed, something fundamental. The memories of her mortal life did not fade entirely. They settled into her consciousness like jade stones in a mountain pool, hard and permanent and impossible to ignore. She remembered loving Loch Long. She remembered birthing Min. She remembered the taste of rice and the ache of tired muscles and the particular quality of joy that comes only to those who know they will die. She was whole, but she was also irrevocably altered. A goddess who had been mortal could never return to the simplicity of pure divinity. Lac Long remained in the palace, frozen in the moment of reunification, trapped by divine power beyond his comprehension. The Celestial Empress approached him slowly, her robes trailing cloud and silence. She looked at him with eyes that were ancient and new simultaneously. She could kill him. It would be mercy, in a way. He had loved a mortal woman who had never truly existed, a fragment of a goddess playing at humanity. His grief at losing both wife and child would destroy him slowly. Death would be kinder. But she did not kill him. Instead, she gave him a gift. She touched his forehead with one finger, and knowledge flooded into him. He understood what she was, what their son had become, why it had to be this way. He saw the cosmic machinery that turned beneath the surface of reality, saw how the sacred sphere maintained the balance, saw how close the world had come to catastrophe because a lonely goddess had wanted to laugh with a mortal man. And he saw her choice, the terrible choice she had made to save their son by transforming him into mist, into the spaces between. When her finger left his forehead, Lac Long staggered backward. Tears streamed down his face, but they were not tears of sorrow alone. They were tears of understanding, of seeing the impossible and comprehending it, of knowing that his son still existed in every fog, every cloud, every morning's first breath. The Celestial Empress spoke for the first time since reuniting, and her voice held harmonics that mortal ears should not be able to hear. She told him he could not stay. Mortals could not live in the palace of heaven. But she would not erase his memories. He would return to his village remembering everything, carrying the weight of his impossible love, his transformed son, his brush with divinity. It was not mercy. It was another kind of sacrifice, the burden of knowledge, the terrible gift of seeing clearly. She gestured, and Lac Long found himself at the base of the mountain, standing in his own rice field as the sun rose over familiar hills. He looked up toward the peak, hidden in clouds that might be his son, and he wept. He lived for many years after that. He never remarried. He worked his fields and raised his crops and watched the morning mist with eyes that saw what others could not. He told no one his story, for who would believe him? But the children of the village noticed that on foggy mornings, old Lac Long would stand in his field with his arms outstretched, as if embracing someone they could not see, and tears would run down his weathered face. When he died, at a great age, the mist gathered thickly around his deathbed. The villagers remarked on it, how the fog came indoors, how it seemed to take shape around the old man as he breathed his last. Some swore they saw a child's form in the vapor, holding the dying man's hand. The Celestial Empress felt the moment of his death from her palace atop Thiên Sơn. She felt it like a string snapping inside her chest, the severing of the last mortal connection. She stood at the edge of her palace and wept, and her tears became jade stones that scattered down the mountain more than ever before, thousands upon thousands of green gems that would puzzle mortals for generations to come. She weeps still on certain nights when the moon is full and the world below is wrapped in mist. She weeps for the mortal life she lived and lost. She weeps for the man who loved a fragment of her. She weeps for the sun who became vapor and breath and the spaces between things. But she does not abandon her duty. She stands eternal watch over the sacred sphere, maintaining the cosmic balance, ensuring the rains fall and the seasons turn and the world continues its ancient dance. She is the Celestial Empress, perfect and terrible and utterly alone, though now her loneliness has a name and a face and memories that will never fade. And Min, he exists as he always has, as he always will. He is the mist that rises from rice paddies at dawn. He is the clouds that gather on mountain tops. He is the fog that makes familiar paths strange and mysterious. Neither living nor dead, neither mortal nor divine, he occupies the spaces between, the child of an impossible love, transformed by sacrifice into something eternal. Sometimes, on mornings when the mist is particularly thick, mothers will hold their children close and whisper prayers to Thiên Hậu, asking her to watch over their little ones as she could not watch over her own. And sometimes, just sometimes, the mist will swirl around those children protectively, and the mothers will feel a presence, gentle and sad, keeping guard. The priests who gather the jade tears from the mountain pools know this story, though they will not speak it aloud. They know why the goddess weeps. They know what she sacrificed and what she gained and what she lost. But they keep silent because the truth is too terrible, too beautiful, too devastating to speak. Some prices are too high to name, some sacrifices too profound to honor with mere words, some love too vast to be contained by mortal understanding. So the jade tears accumulate, century after century, scattered across the slopes of Thiên Sơn, each one a moment of divine grief, each one a reminder that even gods can know the particular anguish of loving something they cannot keep. And in the village where Lac Long once lived, now long forgotten and overgrown, the mist still gathers thickly on certain mornings. Travelers passing through speak of feeling watched, protected, mourned. They speak of seeing shapes in the vapor, hearing laughter that sounds like a child, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and loss that brings them to tears without knowing why. This is the story the elders tell around fires at the edge of the known world, when the night is deep and the mist is rising. This is why the goddess weeps. This is the price of hubris, of divine love, of the terrible choice between duty and desire. And this is why, when the morning fog gathers thick and strange around your home, you should step outside and breathe deeply, and remember that you are breathing the transformed essence of a child who should not have existed, saved by his mother's sacrifice, loved by a goddess who gave up everything to know what it meant to be human, if only for a moment. The world turns. The seasons pass, the rains fall, and the rice grows, and mortals live and die in their brief, bright moments. And atop Thiên Sơn, the Celestial Empress keeps her eternal watch, her tears falling as jade, her duty unbroken, her heart irreparably transformed by the memory of love and loss, and the sun who became mist, and the man who taught her how to laugh. This is the sacred betrayal, the breaking of cosmic law for the sake of mortal connection, the choice that unmade and remade a goddess, the love that could not end even when transformed beyond recognition. This is the truth they will not speak in temples. This is why she weeps.